So yesterday we saw the first edition of the Space Innovation Summit as part of World Space Business Week, the annual high-level space event by Novaspace in Paris. And according to the organizers, this new summit is dedicated to highlighting the entrepreneurial energy driving transformation in our sector. Now, yesterday was an intense day with many highlights, and let me summarize some of my impressions and observations of that first edition. The first theme at the event was funding. In a fireside chat with Mark Bogat of Seraphim Space, it was once again highlighted that startups need to focus on their business model before zooming in on technology. This chat also looked at the risk averseness of European versus American investors and the relative difficulty to scale up in Europe versus the US, something that is being addressed in the startup scene. The second session highlighted the development of space in Africa, with African Space Agency's President Dr. Ouattara. The African Space Agency has 55 member states that look at space as a unique solution to solve some of the issues specific to the African continent. The vastness of the continent make it the perfect objective subject for Earth observation, but also telecommunication to provide communication, provide connections to all the inhabitants spread over that vast continent. Dr. Ouattara emphasized also the importance of African startups and specifically SMEs as an area that is still underdeveloped but will play a critical role in the development of Africa as a space actor. We then looked at the technology trends that are driving the development of space, and I'll just include a few quotes. So we had a representative from SpaceX claiming that ride shares on Falcon 9 specifically at the moment are really enabling new ideas and allowing startups to develop their ideas. Aerospace Lab saying that scalable and adjustable subsystems are critical to align with customer demand. And also, behind every in-orbit demonstration is a constellation. So embrace these IOD missions as a subsystem provider or a service provider to constellations, because it starts with these in-orbit demonstrations. Then we had a representative from Eutelsat talking about adjustability, reconfigurability, reprogrammability of payloads as innovation boosters. So software-defined satellites, software-defined payloads, something that at EmTroniX we happen to be very good at, is one of those innovation boosters, as he calls it. Also, in-orbit serviceability of your satellites, of your payloads, is a game changer in the industry. And one of the keys is time to market. So for, again, subsystem providers, time to market is critical. Then we had a representative from Airbus talking about the trends of AI and quantum that are now driving things like Earth observation, but soon also telecommunications. And the biggest enabler in the near future in space, according to this Airbus representative, is optical communications. And we hear a lot about that as one of the latest mega trends in space. Then we had a very interesting fireside chat with Luca Rossettini, the CEO of D-Orbit, who talked to Torsten Griening of Spacewatch Global about entrepreneurial tips for startups. And a few quotes again. Failures are needed to learn and succeed. A successful business starts with a market roadmap. The market follows relative predictable trends, but technology is impossible to predict. So, in other words, don't start with technology, start with market demand and adjust technology or develop technology that meets that demand if you want to be a successful startup. And funny enough, he said, if you give up, you have a 100% chance of failure. Kind of an open door, but still something to remind. Never give up. Persistency is key. Failure is okay, but giving up is not. Then we had another fireside chat with Kelly Kiedis Ogborn of Space Foundation, which I thought was very interesting because she mentioned that globally there's a launch every 28 hours on average over a year. So almost one launch per day somewhere in the world. And this is up from every 34 hours only a year ago. So within the time span of a year, that launch frequency, launch cadence came down by 6 hours. Almost one launch per day over the year. And also she made the case for better storytelling because the space industry is still ill understood. We need to make space relevant to people. How does space impact daily life? And of course we all have the examples, but as an industry we're just very bad at telling these stories. Then a key topic of World Space Business Week in general, but also on the Innovation Summit, the topic of dual use. And dual use is the space mega trend, if you like, of 2025. And we had lots of discussions about dual use, and it was Peter Fossel of Hydrosat saying that having a defense customer is sort of a seal of approval. He called it the Frank Sinatra effect. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And he was pointing at the defense market as that trigger market, if you like, opening up commercial opportunities for your space business as well. And we had Katrina Chambers of Alpine Space Ventures saying that every company should really consider dual use. In other words, should think about defense applications of technology or data. And not just think about it, but put some of the requirements that the defense sector has in your products or services by design. We had a very interesting keynote by Chris Camp of Astra, and it was promised to be entertaining, and it really was. Chris Camp, for you who don't know him, is the CEO of Astra, which he claimed is the third commercial launcher company in the world, only after SpaceX and Rocket Lab. And that's quite a feat, seeing that he has only 2 successful orbital launches out of the 4 attempts, but that still makes him the third largest commercial launcher company in the world. And he says, your brilliant engineering team will make a great first unit of whatever it is that you make. Prototypes are great, but the big challenge is in then industrializing, in then turning that prototype, that demonstrator, into something that can be mass produced. And he had lots of examples of how he did that, had many failures, had many problems, turning his first successful launcher prototypes into something repeatable. And he's looking at building 300 launchers, disposable launchers per year. And it took him many years after that first successful launch to finally get close. And he is getting close to that point where he can produce these things like soda cans, as he literally told it, right now. Mass producing is a different thing than making a good prototype, a very valuable lesson to many of us in the industry. Then we had another session on funding, and we had Frank Salzgeber of CST in Saudi Arabia saying that a startup is not a sprint, but it's also not a marathon, it's more like a decathlon. There's so many different things you need to do. You need to be persistent on so many different, in so many different areas, that it's more a decathlon than a marathon or a sprint. And revenue, he said, is key to investor money. If you have a launch customer that is giving you revenue, that will open doors to investors who will want to invest in your company, because you have proven that your product or solution is a fit to an actual customer problem. So that was the end of the day, but then I joined the main World Space Business Week stage for an interesting panel discussion on subsystem manufacturers. And we had a very interesting discussion, for example, where Marcus Geis of D-Cubed said that many companies now in the satellite industry are vertically integrated, but not because they want to be vertically integrated, but because they've been let down by their suppliers. And that says something about how the market works. So we see satellite manufacturers, bus manufacturers, payload manufacturers, or even combined ones that simply do everything in-house because there are no suppliers who can meet their requirements. Very interesting. Then we had Nicolas Capet of Anywaves saying that delivering quality products is key. And some subsystems, like the antennas that Anywaves produces, are critical parts to a mission. And if the antenna fails, the mission fails. And that's why the focus on quality is so critically important. And what he also said, very interestingly, that the real nightmare with subsystems is in screws, connectors, interfaces, both on the hardware and software side. So keep it as simple as possible for fast integration into your payloads, into your satellites, into your buses, whatever it may be, and document everything. Clear documentation and simple interfaces, simple software are key to mission success. And then we had Avi Shabtai of Remonspace saying that vertical integration, the topic that we talked about a minute ago, vertical integration versus decentralization comes in sort of waves when subsystems may not be available on the open market components, but at some point the subsystem and component manufacturers, because of their specialization, catch up with the vertically integrated providers and become relevant again. So there's a trend and there's an opposite trend. And as a last question, very interestingly, the panelists were asked for the next big thing in the next 12 months in subsystems, in subsystems for space. We had Remonspace saying constellations, of course, that's been a trend for quite a while. Mass manufacturing, going back to the remarks of Chris Kemp. The representative from D-Cubed said abundance of dual-use funding will trigger developments of crazy things. So there's money available in the market that will allow people to do maybe crazier things than before, like space solar plants, which we also saw presentations on. Then a representative from ETL Systems said a trend is the scaling of the ground segment. With the abundance of data coming down, the ground segment needs to adjust. And he said it's not sexy, but it's very critical, and that makes perfect sense. Relia said orbital transfer vehicles that are now used because of a lack of transfer to geostationary orbit. There's now specific orbital transfer vehicles taking that over, and obviously optical communication taking much of the market of radio frequency at the moment, especially when you look at intersatellite links, where optical in a couple of years will be the default standard. And then Nicolas from Anywaves, again focusing on faster speed to market, is going to be a big deal maker. And more interest in an efficient supply chain. So that was 14 hours of conference, almost in 14 minutes. So it's a long video, but so much is being said, and there's so many trends happening in the space industry that it's very difficult to summarize that all in a short format. I was really happy to see that innovation in itself becomes a topic at World Space Business Week, because innovation is what drives the industry at the moment from a commercial point of view. Not just innovation in technology, but definitely innovation on the business and market side of things. So on behalf of EmTroniX, thank you very much for watching the video. If you made it all the way to the end, I'm looking forward to seeing you all at the next event. I wish you a very pleasant day. Bye-bye.